Welcome to episode 4 of Sit, Sip, and Synapse. Today I am so happy to have Geerthi on this episode. So, just to give you guys a little prelude on who she is, Geerthi was born and raised in Montreal and she self identifies as a Tamil Canadian. She loves giving back to her community in any way possible and is one of the co founders of the nonprofit organization, the Shakti Collective. And she also serves as the VP marketing for the Montreal Tamil Health Initiative, another nonprofit health organization. Thank you so much, Geerthi, for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So usually how we start these off is giving just like a brief introduction into what this podcast is going to be. So I was thinking you can start us off by that.
Yes. So today we're going to touch upon autism, which I was recently diagnosed with. And we're going to talk about a bit of ableism in the South Asian community and mental health and how that relates to my experiences with autism and mental health over the years, and uh, how even in the society we live in, just institutionally, how ingrained it is, and it's how it imposes those barriers on people with autism or other neurodivergent disabilities or conditions, or in general, even physical disabilities.
So, ableism is a belief system that sees persons with disabilities as being less worthy of respect and consideration, less able to contribute and participate, or of less inherent value than others. It may be conscious or unconscious and may be embedded in institutions, systems, or the broader culture of a society.
So you were talking about getting a recent diagnosis. Would you be able to walk us through, how that happened and just your experience in terms of like getting that diagnosis?
Yes. So uh, to even explain to you how I recently got it, I would have to go back like a long time ago. To be honest, I think definitely after CEGEP, I actually even after high school, like transitioning into CEGEP for me was like pretty difficult. But I didn't realize it was difficult in my head. And this is where I didn't know I was autistic, because we're like usually for like this is a word I'm going to use, neurotypicals, which is anyone that doesn't have a neurodivergent condition. Um, for generally, it's easy to identify emotions and identify how you're feeling in relation to your environment. And for me, it was actually very difficult. So I was confused with how I was feeling, my own sensory needs or limits, and transitioning from high school where I had a routine and like was able to function with those routines in place and supports in place, kind of fell apart when I went to Asia, because you're on your own completely. And it was an environment where I didn't have any of my friends there either. So adapting to that was really hard. And at first, I couldn't tell I was having a hard time either, because I assumed everyone around me was fine. So maybe it's just something else. Or maybe what I was feeling is like, okay, maybe I'm being lazy, or I'm something off is off with me for the time being. Okay. Um, so over time, like I was still doing fine, like academically, even though it was like a bit more harder to adjust. Um, I definitely felt like it was hard to like I took put more effort to adjust to everything, and more effort, that it like led to a burnout. But that burnout at the time, I wasn't sure what it was. I thought it was just like a regular burnout, and everyone kind of goes through that. But it was a lot more intense for me, in terms of executive functioning, which Aliane talked about last time. So it would be like I would be skipping meals, or I wouldn't even get like realize I'm hungry and I wouldn't eat. It'd be hard for me to get up in the morning, or even if I was at school, it would be hard for me to get up and go to the class, even if I was like 2 hours early, just because I'm paralyzed by decisions that should be easy to make. Um, it was a lot harder during that time because of all the extra stuff I was thinking about. And at the time, obviously, I didn't know that this was not something I have to struggle with, because I just assume everyone struggles with this, and no one really talks about these things, right? Um, Going through CEGEP or high school, or even like in our community. I did try going to psychologists at the CEGEP too. I even reached out to doctors outside of that, when I was having a hard time. This wasn't just like, this was before the burnout too, where I started feeling that things were off. Um, they weren't helpful in the sense that it was more like very on the surface kind of help, like, oh, you're probably just stressed, or maybe science isn't for you. And this is where, again, like, you're not like, as a person, for me, it's just, I wasn't sure if I am thinking like, but is science not for me? Like, but I love science and I want to go into medicine. I'm pretty sure I'm very passionate about this. And this is subjects that I usually don't have a hard time with. And, um, it's not like I don't understand the concepts, but it's like, why can't I do this? Right. Like, just doing your homework was just so hard. And it's like, usually it wasn't this hard for me. And it's like, before too, I was involved in extracurricular or in high school or like other external activities, but I felt like I was having a lot more harder time now than usual. And I think a lot of it also had to do with masking, how I readapted to a new environment. So I think growing up, I adapted to one type of environment from elementary and high school. So you learn all those social cues, or learning social cues from observing others, and I've been used to that. And then I think being put into a whole new environment, I felt like I had to basically relearn everything or unlearn everything or observe how other people are making friends or other people are talking to the teachers. It was like things that you normally wouldn't think of. Sorry, I don't want to say normally, but I guess you wouldn't think is a hard time to think about, or like think you're thinking about it, but us were actively thinking about it as autistics or neurodivergents, because we're the way we learn social cues is we're observing others, and unintentionally I'll be masking, and even that I didn't know that I was trying to fit in or like, um, I guess, mimic other people's behaviors. And I wouldn't say that I wasn't being myself, but I think it was also at the same time not myself. Um, it's like a hard topic to actually think about, because like it's something that like I've been recently going through, like a lot of like identity crisis ish. I feel like all my life it was like constantly something I had to go through. Uh, it just, at the time I didn't realize how hard it was, and then now it's like kind of unraveling, um, and like refinding myself, I guess, or like being okay with um, being naturally myself in front of people, not worrying about like how others are perceiving me, or yeah, I guess it's like all those things like combined. So yeah, so moving on from CEGEP though, after that burnout in CEGEP, again, I didn't get the right resources or help that I needed, even at CEGEP with the psychologists or counselors. And this is after multiple meetings, and even the academic advisors at this school was the worst, because I mean, usually they always have a bad rep in most schools, but this one was really like traumatizing for me. I think like it really made me want to give up like on school, and sorry, let me take a second. Um, like it really made me want to give up on school, and like pursuing my dreams. And it was hard because I didn't know how to talk about this at home either with my parents. Um, and I think that comes from a lot of like, again, stigma from the Asian community and the pressures that are already put on you. Um, and it's not that I didn't want to be honest with them, but as I guess someone, um, at the time I didn't know I was autistic, but normally what I realized, from what I've heard from other autistics and different psychologists I see too, is that these are social cues that we don't know what's right, like what's normal and what's not normal. And when we see others and how they're dealing with it, we feel like kind of like imposters, um, that we're like something about us is off and we don't know how to deal with it. And I've noticed like it's not the first time, from other people in the autistic community that I've met online and stuff. They have mentioned like it's hard for me to be honest with my parents because all my life they've told me to behave one way. So they've just been adjusted to that. So they'll try to be complicit or obedient at home, or portray the image they want to portray. Whereas when you're with certain environments or people, like your friends, you tend to unmask and be more natural. Um, so, like with my friends, I'm a lot more like relaxed and obviously more myself. And I didn't feel like I was judged. Um, and I felt like typically everyone is just honest. And, obviously if there's something off, they'll tell you kind of thing. But even within my friends, I've noticed that only over the years, like recently, after maybe a few years after adulthood, they'd be like, "Yeah, I don't like when you do this," or they assume certain things about you based on social cues, which I didn't realize I was doing because we honestly don't have any like um, physical or I guess like physical awareness of how we're talking or what our face is showing to like expressions. So uh, the emotions I'm expressing in my voice might not be the emotions I'm actually expressing, and it'll confuse or I've gotten comments where they thought I was condescending, or I like or autistics have a way to like over explain, or even ADHD people actually, where they'll go into detail, but it's we're trying to help and like um, bring awareness to something, and also it's called info dumping. So when we get excited, we'll like talk a lot about a certain topic, and when we're passionate, it happens too. But we won't realize that our voice is going up a volume, and at the same time, it sounds like to other people that we're being condescending or um, like over explaining something because we're just like, okay, like I don't want to hear about this anymore. But the thing is, I never knew that this wasn't considered something socially unacceptable um, until like recently. So this is like something like apparently it's been going on for years, but I never knew that this was considered a bad thing. But also, it depends on the people too. So like, I have friends that have told me like, but that's just how you talk. That's not weird for me. That's just everyone's different though, which is generally how people should think. And it does help with a more accepting kind of environment and community, because there are normally different thinking styles, and that's what I think people don't understand with neurodiversity is that uh, there's a different thinking style and we're wired differently, but it doesn't mean that we have like the same like malicious intentions through certain actions, I guess. Like for you, like a flat tone can probably mean like is something off with them or whatever, but for us, we're not actually hearing that, but we're incited on the inside, we're excited. Um, or our expressions won't show happiness, but like we're actually happy, which is like completely unintentional. Like, and we won't realize it, but it's something that I guess like we've never had awareness on as like a society in general about neurodiversity and how it presents. So a lot of these people I think do get isolated or tossed aside or misunderstood. I think have been even called manipulative, or uh, like toxic, because when there's sensory overload, I might have a mental breakdown, a meltdown, and our meltdowns will look like maybe I'm crying or maybe I'm upset about something or I can't handle like changes, last minute changes to something because it means I have to readapt to something, right? And um, for others, it looks like why are you being unreasonable? But for me, it's severe. Actually, like it's like causing me physical pain on the inside. Um, and for a while, I wasn't sure if I was just depressed, if I had anxiety. Like often, girls with neurodivergent conditions get misdiagnosed over the years, which was what happened to me from Asia. Like I got misdiagnosed with like, oh, you're probably just stressed. It's probably just burnout. And then general anxiety. And then also with these on school or on campus resources, they don't go in depth as much with the treatment or how to help you. Um, so even after that, I think when I went into uni, uh, I tried seeing another psychologist there, and it was the same thing. So they're like, "You're probably just going through depression, etc." And so this carried on for a few years, and until I had like severe autistic shutdown or meltdown, burnout, um, like 2 years ago from uni, and it was basically an accumulation of like years of masking. The thing is, and the more I masked, it's actually causing me more stress, and I don't realize that I'm not supposed to be having a hard time with this. Um, so I've been dealing with a lot of that myself because I didn't have any like family to understand that. And it wasn't that I didn't have understanding friends, but it's also a new topic. So it's hard to find that understanding anywhere. And it wasn't helping that professionals weren't helpful. So I was just lost and in limbo for like the last 10 years or so. And I think it was finally in 2019, uh, I was just done. I couldn't, I don't know what happened, what triggered it exactly, but I think it was like one of those really bad meltdowns. And I've just had enough because on top of that, I would get comments like, I feel like you're not trying enough with your hard enough with your mental health or blah, blah, blah. And it's like frustrating to hear because I am. And I went to, the ER to get like immediate help when I had like suicidal ideations, which is also very common for autistics and for those with ADHD. They have meltdowns. Like any severe kind of trigger can feel like you want to kill yourself, or and maybe we should put a trigger warning for this, but
We will. We will.
like you want to really hurt yourself. And the thing is, it can get that dangerous, even though it's like a momentary feeling. Um, and so because that's happened often, I thought I was depressed because it's like we only understand as suicidal ideation with depression, right? Or anxiety. And that's how we've always kind of seen it. Um, so that's how I was getting like misdiagnosed with this. So the first doctor I saw in 2019, after a while of going through like the hospitals, going through a CLSC, and putting my like, I even added my name to like the mental health bank so I can be on a wait list for a proper psychiatrist. Because again, I also had like financial limitations, so that was another barrier to go through. Um, and when I finally saw this doctor at a walk-in clinic, it was actually a South Asian run clinic in Parfax, and I think that kind of helped maybe with the cultural familiarity. Maybe he was able to kind of understand beyond it, and it helped that GP had like psychiatric training as well, so he was familiar with the conditions. And so when I went in like I was already bawling kind of thing, and he was super helpful, and he was already setting me up with like um, being a social worker at the same time temporarily while following up with him every week or so just to see what really I needed. And I think that's when I realized I found kind of the right person, because for the first time someone asked me what exactly I needed and what was going on with me instead of like imposing something on me. And um, so he heard me out, and initially, at least I did like because of the added stress and overtime with burnouts, I did definitely develop anxiety. Um, and I did develop like panic attacks that year in 2019. So it was hard for me to deal with and function, like at least carry out executive functions properly, even more so than usual. So he first diagnosed me. Well, he didn't diagnose me. He did prescribe me an antidepressants to at least help with the anxiety and suicidal ideation I was having during that time. And that was um, in December 2019 ish. And in 2020, last year, early on, after a few sessions with him or like meetings and with the social worker that he referred me to, um, they both realized I had ADHD, and they're like, I think you have ADHD, and like it's clear from the way you're talking about it and the way you speak that it is that. Um, and for me, it was just like, what? Because I didn't even think of ADHD at all, like no, for I really thought like I was just gonna get like coping skills therapy for anxiety or depression and medication, like tips on how to study, because a lot of it what I was talking about was also that I was having such a hard time like focusing for longer periods when usually I'd be able to focus on one thing for so long, right?
Mhm.
Or I would tell them that I don't even have like a lack of motivation, which is the confusing part of depression, is that you have like a sustained long period of lack of motivation. Um, and like obviously like maybe a lack of will to like live, etc. But in my case, it was like I would get motivated a lot. I would obviously like my special interests, and I would have a lot of different interests and get hyper focused on them or hyper fixated on them for a long time. But it's not like, and I was happy doing it, but I needed to apply the same thing at the right time when I'm studying as well. And that's what I want to know how to do. And they realized that I had ADHD through that. And it would also explain the emotional dysregulation. So with women with ADHD, that's the difference in the hyperactivity. Is that for us, it's like hyperactivity in emotions and our like regulating our emotions and inattentiveness. Whereas with guys, which is mostly the model everyone tends to follow, and which is why girls don't tend to be diagnosed as often, is that they're hyperactive, just running around, fidgeting all the time, or yeah, like they can't focus. But that's it. Like it's like the typical stereotype of ADHD that you see in that we talk about or people joke about. But um, it can go deeper than that, and like there's different forms. So basically, like there's different forms of ADHD, and it presents completely differently with girls and boys. But there's just not enough research done on how it manifests. So when I first got that diagnosis last year, I think it was definitely eye opening, and like it was like a moment of relief ish because it was like there's an answer kind of. And I remember when he told me this too in the office, I was like ADHD, and I was like, so what does that mean exactly, right? Because like I've never really, I felt like I didn't really have that problem when I was younger. And he's like, well, that's understandable because when you're younger, you don't have those extra stressors where it's harder for you to function. So it seemed like you were just a gifted kid, and naturally gifted and smart. And people didn't really notice that. It just became a problem when you were older and you had more of those stressors and you couldn't function the same way. And um, so like it started like piecing a lot of stuff together, and it was like, wow, like that, like it felt like your just whole life like wow, like mind blown. And I just had so many questions from then. And I remember the one thing he said was like, you could be a genius and you could definitely make it in med school. You could definitely make it and do whatever you want. You just didn't have the right help or resources. And I think I honestly had like another client session there too. It was just like holy shit kind of thing, like a wow moment. And from there, like he started me on medications, which is Vyvanse that Ariane mentioned, like also in our video. And here's the thing: I was taking the antidepressants at the same time. He did tell me to keep it going just in case because um, it could be that anxiety is comorbid to the ADHD, or that could be a temporary thing. But it was safer to keep me going on it for the time being while I was transitioning into these meds too. So that was another difficult, I think, phase of my life. Was like it was a good thing I got diagnosed, but now I had to get used to the meds, and the meds itself had so many side effects. So like a lot of physical side effects that I was getting used to was like weight gain, which affected my confidence for a bit. I mean, it still had, but I kind of got over it in my own way, I guess, like over time. Um, so physical weight gain, you lack of sleep. You can get, ironically, more anxiety with the antidepressants too in certain moments. So there's that as well. Um, you kind of have like these kind of like pins on needles feeling on your body when you're getting used to them initially. Uh, and then there's like dry mouth, loss of appetite, um, a lot of like different uh, side effects that were kind of affecting me throughout the day. And on top of that, I started this new medication, and new medication was a lot worse because I was having definitely a hard time sleeping. And so it's like symptoms of insomnia. So I felt like I was awake longer, and I was having a harder time sleep. and that was one thing I had to get used to. And then I think finally when I got onto the right like dosage, because we were increasing it like incrementally, um, the next step was okay, like you're now I'm used to the meds, and we were trying to figure out like how it affects me when I'm studying, because at the time technically I wasn't in school last year, so I was trying to like at least re-prepare myself to school. So like I was trying to study for the MCAT. I was trying to like study like or read other stuff, at least take on more tasks with like Shakti and MTHI. Um, I did notice that I was getting a lot more productive, and I was able to do tasks, basic tasks like honestly, even phoning like to make an appointment was hard without these meds. So like basic tasks that you wouldn't think are hard were definitely I was able to get it done. I was definitely eating more on time. Um, so these are like things that people don't think are hard to do, but it really is. Like for a while, like let's for me, even going to the bathroom, like we'll forget to go to the bathroom. Like it gets that bad for us, and sometimes we think it's better to sacrifice going to the bathroom or eating to get the stuff we're doing done instead. And that's happened to me a lot while I'm working or studying, which is not a good thing either. So another thing it was managing that time and like what coping skills could help. So even though I had the follow-ups with my general practitioner, the next step was finding a therapist also. So it was really a waiting game for a few months. Like last year was like the CLSC and finding a private one. And after seeing someone at the CLC, and then also I met someone at work that had ADHD, and she was a woman, and she was also diagnosed at 14. She was she brought up the fact that have you thought about autism, because it's possible that you have that too. And it's not that I didn't know anything about autism, because I do have a cousin with autism as well. It just presents differently for him, and it's a spectrum. And I, it's just that I think we've never been fully educated on really how it is or presented. All I knew that it was a neurological disorder, but I didn't realize that uh, like it could present itself differently as well. I think we have a certain stereotype or mental image of how it looks, um, with being nonverbal or whatever it is, or um, the other common stereotype is that autistics lack empathy, which is not true actually. They're very hyper empathetic. When they say lack of empathy, it's more maybe in the moment we won't understand something, the concept is hard, but we're trying to understand. So we're actually hyper empathetic in that sense, because we want to understand what's happening, and we'll go into like full analysis mode of it. um so for me it was like, but I'm not unempathetic, I'm not this, like, so like you're going through the typical ones, you're like I didn't understand it. And then when I was going through like a bunch of research and myself, and like looking into like the autistic community and finding others who are basically like me, talking about their experiences and you know um, how autism presents itself, I realized that I was autistic. And a lot of people who end up finding out they're autistic when they're adulthood is self-diagnosis at first, because it'll be like after years in their 30s or 40s, and it's usually with women especially too, because again it's like super undiagnosed, and you're often dismissed of your experiences when you're younger, or they'll get misdiagnosed with even bipolar disorder, and then you're not getting the right resources, and then like a lot of things you want to do in your life you don't end up doing. So I'm at least thankful that I found out when I was 25 or 26, which is still pretty late, but it took me a while to get there. And I think when you're finding out that, that's like the biggest, like it was even bigger than ADHD. I think like just finding that out, because it's like yes I had ADHD, but then it's like I realized that ADHD was comorbid uh, to autism, and there's a lot of comorbid conditions to autism. So that could be anxiety disorder, a learning disability, developmental delay. Uh, there's like so many conditions that are comorbid to it, and we have a higher chance of presenting it. But that's not also 100% for everyone. Like every autistic is different, And that's something that people need to remember. Um, so yeah, like that was just another journey of its own, like in the last few months. And because I went to apply to school again, you can't apply to school without all these documentations. So spending all this time and effort, like it was like a burnout of its own just to get the resources you want to advocate for yourself, especially during the pandemic, because there was a lack of like appointments available. There's a lack of people testing for ADHD or autism for free. So one of the assessments or places I wanted to get assessed at was the Université de Montréal, which usually offers it for free for non-students as well, for adults. But they're not doing any testing this year. Like they're not even taking appointments for the whole year because they already had a waitlist from last year and they had to push all of those off. So like I had to definitely go into private. I had no choice. So that was like another financial burden I had to take up, which is another barrier. Obviously, not a lot of people have that privilege to do. So I think I spent almost $1,000 in for the initial assessment to get that document. And it's not like I didn't know I was autistic or ADHD, but you still need those papers for school. So although I had documents from my doctor and GP, he helped me at least with that aspect. And the therapist I recently started seeing was someone at the Argyle Institute, who's again, she was wonderful because even as a therapist who specializes in autism or ADHD, they can definitely dismiss your condition. And that is something that's commonly seen because a lot of these therapists or psychologists tend to follow the DSM-5, but maybe an outdated version. Like Asperger's is something that's been removed from the DSM-5 for years, but there are still professionals that use it as a term. And I'll explain later why that's not something that's not used anymore. But basically, like for me, even finding a person that can help me was like a huge thing. And thank God, like she was available too, and during this pandemic to help me. But she was super helpful with writing me a letter for school, getting me the assessments. That process itself was a little long, um, like maybe a few weeks, and I would say it's basically the documents she asked me to fill out. So there was like a lot of like questionnaires, like you have to basically clinically answer the questions based on the on a scale for each kind of like question. So they would ask me like had trouble focusing, etc. There's a bunch of stuff like so many factors involved in there. In addition to questionnaires I had to give to either family or friends that knew me for a certain period of time that can answer those questions as well because it's based on other people's experiences and what they perceive. So one of the questions actually was funny, like what I was saying was like, is this person condescending or manipulative? Although it asks that, they don't actually mean is this person actually manipulative? It's that do they seem manipulative to you? And a lot of times it is that misunderstanding. And from my friends' experiences, and it's not like I wasn't angry at them because this is something we've talked about and we did have this conversation. Um, and that was like hard enough also with my friends too, disclosing it, but it did help with the diagnosis and like grateful for their support as well. Um, and so that was in April, actually very recent when I finally got the papers finalized. And so I applied for school and stuff, and now I'm just waiting for like answers. But definitely like even I realized while I was applying and like, or I guess like after the diagnosis or like certain things I do where I realized, oh, I could ask for support for this. And the thing is, I'll tell myself, I'm like, no, maybe they'll think I'm faking it or like, or like asking for too much or, you're just like dismissing yourself. And that comes from a lot of like internalized ableism or how I think society usually views like people, or it's like the concept of being lazy or you're faking it or you're using it as an excuse. And it's not an excuse, it's an explanation, but it doesn't mean I'm like dismissing any accountability for anything, right? And that's something that like a lot of people tend to forget about. Um, and I'm so sorry that we talked a bit over it, but all this to say, like this took a 10-year journey to figure out that I was even autistic. But it's not that I was only autistic in the last 10 years. I was autistic all my life from birth. and I had ADHD all my life. It just wasn't found till recently. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing such a personal journey. Like it just shows like your compensation and how much you had to work even with the obstacles presented to you without knowing just attests to your strength and your courage and everything, all the positive attributes of who you are.
Thank you.
So thank you for sharing that. It was really powerful. There was just so much you unpacked in that
Yeah,
conversation,
I
and I
realized.
not in a bad way, in the most positive
Yeah,
way. And I want to I'm like itching to address all of it, but
yeah,
I think that's unreasonable. But there's a lot of important things I think may be helpful to address.
mhm,
Definitely the concept of ableism, and also just stigma of mental health
yeah,
in the South Asian community. You can start with either or, and we can have a conversation on that. But I think those might be two essential topics to
definitely.
discuss if you're open.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I definitely want to talk about ableism and mental health. Those go very much hand in hand. I mean, already the way with mental health is addressed, let alone in our community. Like I know we say the Asian community is stigmatized, but in general it is stigmatized. And it's fine with all these programs, posting on mental health awareness month, but there's still a huge misunderstanding on it. And um, like even at work, if someone calls them sick, you will hear coworkers that'll say comments about the said coworker, like, "Oh, are they really sick?" or like, whatever, And do you need to make those comments? Do you need to judge, right? Um, those people might be going through a hard time, and you don't know it. And I don't think it's necessary for you to also intrude or ask about that. Um, and I think it's been just normalized like that culture, right? Everywhere. And it's even worse in the Tamil community, where you hear parents be like, "Oh, what depression, what anxiety, like we came here with nothing and blah blah," which again, it's a true attestation to their strength as well. But I don't think they realize that their mental health has been affected as well. They just think that it's normal what they're going through, and that they don't need help for it, right? And um, I think that's something that's hard to unlearn from their culture and stuff, but it's definitely something um that can be over time, like at least desensitized a bit to the topic and idea of accepting help, and the idea of taking breaks, um and normalizing that. And that and like that aspect of ableism is that they think like everyone should be able to do anything, and like there's a standard, and this should be the standard for everyone, of success, or like being an able-bodied person, right? And when I say able-bodied, that's physically and mentally. They just think that that should be everyone and there should be no excuses. Um, so I think that's where the barriers come in, where like even for me with autism, or ADHD, I have had comments from even friends when I've disclosed the condition and be like, "You can't blame everything on your ADHD." I'm not blaming everything on my ADHD. I'm specifically telling you though that this is a manifestation of ADHD, and technically it is a part of my identity. It's a neurological disorder. It is how I am wired, right? That's not something I can change about myself. And but there are certain things that I can adapt to you guys. But I'm not going to mask myself either. And that's where harmful therapy is actually, um, like I'm pretty sure you've heard of ABA therapy. And this is a therapy that's technically been hailed as a standard for years and been funded heavily by certain organizations. What we didn't know is that those organizations were ableist too and try to cure autism, or they think autism is a disease, or that autistic people are incomplete. Um, but that's not what it is. We're neurodivergent. There's something called neurodiversity, and we all think differently and we're wired differently. But how we are as a person is not because we're less than you. And this is where the ableism comes in, where they think we're less than them.
Yeah.
And we'll see this where I've noticed even in academia, and like Aliane mentioned, is that there's a gatekeeping now with people more and more neurodivergent or other disabled individuals, whether it's physical or mental, um, entering these spaces, right? And trying to dominate these spaces. But for some reason, the society, like, I don't know if it's society being threatened by us, or they think us coming in and working is like, they don't need to help us anymore, or like they want to keep us oppressed more, or not oppressed, like helpless kind of, um, which is like very harmful too, because again, these disabilities manifest differently for everyone. If you're capable and you thrive in that environment and you can bring so much to this profession because I mean thanks to your condition and also just in general you are a talented person, I don't think that should be stopped, right? If you're able to do your job properly.
Yeah.
But unfortunately that's not how it's seen in academia or professional spaces because of a lack of awareness on it. Like, I have a friend, well, my coworker, who was telling me about her condition with ADHD. Back when she was diagnosed in high school in Ontario, they have like an art division and a science division or technical. So after grade 10, before her diagnosis, she was already doing like performing well, I guess, in terms of grades. And this is where the stigma comes in with accommodations and working. As soon as she was diagnosed, they forced her to be in technical, even though she wanted to stay in science. And she was doing well in science. But they assumed, well, no, you have ADHD, so you should go in an easier thing. And it was very similar to what Eliane was saying with like in high school, they're like, no, your grades are too good, so we're going to take the accommodations away. No, she's smart and she just needed the right environment for her to do her test. But that's her performing the same way as anyone else that would get a 90s, right? But for them, that environment with a class full of 30 people is the same as her being in a class alone. I think that's what people are not understanding. It's not like we're getting an advantage here, right? We're trying to catch up, if anything, and we're trying to match to the same level or environment that you're able to function in normally. For us, it's harder to, right? Which is where the extra time comes in, the medication. The medication thing definitely triggered me a little bit, like the comment from last video, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe these are like future med students and like actual even current doctors commenting on it like this, right? This is where it's like discouraging because you trust that professionals are there to help you, right? And that's where I find that ableism is so ingrained in our society that even people who are supposed to help you and technically not judge um, and help you thrive in these don't technically think the same way, right? And I think that comes with like disability justice. There's very rarely much advocates in that, I find. And it's not really because it's not a problem. Um, I think it's just because we have so many problems um, already that it's hard to find the time and like I guess resources to focus or advocate for it and have the necessary policies um, to advocate for disability justice. And whether that's like also raising awareness on neurodiversity. I've recognized, like, from some of the activists I follow, like, what they've been talking about is teaching about neurodiversity from young, like, basically in schools. So, teaching from young that everyone does think differently, you know, and not to judge based on someone's behavior. So, like, if a kid is stimming, like, let's say shaking their leg or they're fidgeting, it's not because they're not paying attention or they're being weird. It's a natural occurrence for them in their body. Like for me, technically my stimming has like changed over the years because of my masking. Um, I've been told to stop like fidgeting when I was young. So I think over time it just manifested into me like biting in my cheek over time. I've like nonstop throughout the whole day. I'll be doing that and I can't even stop it if I wanted to. And that's just me, like my body's being constantly regulated with that constant stimming. For others, it's like they'll be clicking their fingers or it'll manifest in different ways. It could even be like saying a word repeatedly out loud. But it's to recognize that those behaviors aren't harmful to you personally, you know? And I think there's a thing like, oh, it's inconveniencing or annoying, right? And I think that's that's what where like the misconceptions, and like that's where the ableism comes in, where people are not allowed to be themselves, and you feel judged and you feel alone. A lot of this stems from like heavy ableism in our community, and whether it's a South Asian community or um, in general our external communities, right, in society, like in schools and work. Um, and like I've heard even my parents say like, "Oh, we didn't have autism when we were younger," or like, um, it's not that you didn't have it; they were just probably misconceived as something else. You're telling me there was no weird people in your community that you thought like, "Oh, why are they so awkward?" Or, like chances are they might have had autism or some other kind of condition you just didn't know, right? Um, and or they would say that someone is dumb because they didn't study, and it's like maybe they're not dumb; they just didn't have the right resources to perform that well in school. Um, and I think that's where it comes in uh, with the how this barrier, this ableism, imposes these barriers in life. It can be like stopping a person from doing so much and meeting their potential. And I feel like it really takes that agency away from people. Like, honestly, if I didn't have the ability to even push to ask for myself, I think I would have given up so long ago, right? And that's because I kept trying to find an answer, and I kept trying to think like it's like there has to be a way, like it doesn't make sense. I know I'm smart. I know I can understand these concepts, and I know this is what I want to do all my life. I do want to become a doctor, right? Um, but why can't I do it the way I want it to, right? Why can't I overcome these barriers? And I think there's some racial discrimination in there for sure. Like I wouldn't say discrimination, but like a racial bias. So there's like a gender bias as well in disability and ableism. A lot of times, boys get diagnosed more frequently than girls do, and girls are dismissed as having an attitude problem, um, starting when they're young. And that could be like from like impulsive decisions, um, having mood swings. They'll be called a bitch, or like different things are thrown around. Whereas men don't have that barrier, even in the disabled community. There's those barriers. So this is where the intersectionality part comes into in disability justice and ableism, and how to tackle that. Um, and I think that's something like it's going to definitely take a while to overcome. But I have started seeing changes, at least subtle changes, and that at least gives me hope that it'll start being normalized too. Like even in Montreal, we have at Atelier Abilité, and their whole goal is to work with South Asian kids that are autistic and their parents, and sensitize the whole concept, and um, enabling a better environment for the child and the parent, right, together. Um, and the other thing with autism is uh, like people, I think, tend to really think every autistic person is the same, and you'll hear terms like high functioning, and so this is where it's outdated, and like the ableism also comes in again from the DSM-5, is that they used to put terms like high functioning, low functioning. Asperger's was like a whole thing on its own when technically it was autism. And Asperger's was actually named after uh, like someone from the Nazi regime who was actually doing experiments on people with like autistic people, and uh, differentiating between Asperger's and this, as Asperger's is like the higher, like superior form of it, and that comes from white supremacy. There's like it's crazy how much of a history this goes behind like disability justice and the white supremacy behind it, the ableism behind it. Um, so even like getting those terms removed from a DSM-5, it's technically been more than a century now, and we still have it, right? So it's crazy how much advancement we still need to do in that area and research. And there are research done on it too. The difference is they're not funded by the right people, or I guess not funded, like they don't meet the needs of the people who are doing the major activism, like organizations like Autism Speaks, which is very ableist charity actually, who fund ABA therapy. And ABA therapy is like more to it focuses more on how to make an autistic person act like a neurotypical person. So like it suppresses um, their behaviors, but it doesn't mean that they'll function better. And the research didn't show at the time how suppressing and masking causes a lot of trauma in kids. And a lot of those kids that have gone through ABA therapy are speaking out against it now, and people are not listening to them. So it's still something that's very like new and very like heavily, I guess, stigmatized and dismissed by people. And I think it's crazy because like you're not going to hear someone saying like, well, cancer is not real, or like, no, I think you're just thinking about it in your head, right? Or someone saying like, no, man, this therapy doesn't work on me. Like, change the thing, right? You won't hear that for those kind of physical conditions, but you'll hear it for autism. You hear it for like different mental illnesses and mental health conditions or disabilities, and it's really discouraging. And it doesn't make sense because why is one thing treated differently and the other isn't, right? And I'm not sure where that problem would be tackled, but I definitely do think accepting difference starts from there as well. um, that difference is okay, and like socially like acceptable, and everyone does think differently. It doesn't mean that your actions are excused or dismissed. It's just that there is a way to help certain people and understand where they're coming from without judging and isolating them. And I think that's something I'm still dealing with. I've realized, like, even within my friends or people I thought I had friendships with, like, I guess misconceived like my friendship level. Um, or I'm considered more gullible because of that, because I've been taken advantage of in my friendships. I've also been like cyberbullied. I've been like taken advantage of in so many ways. Um, and it's not that I don't have a character judgment, but I realize that I tend to trust more than others, or I'll see a pattern of behavior, and I think this pattern of behavior should be normal because you expect that to be the right, um, like this should be what they are usually, right? So when they switch up, it's like I don't understand what just happened. And for others, it's like, well, I guess like for other people in normal relationships, like neurotypicals, that friendships or social cues, like hidden social cues like that, are easier to uh, notice than us. So I feel like that's something that's also would be helpful to make awareness to, that not everyone understands social cues the same way. And, you know, it can hurt a lot of people when, you take distance, or if, let's say, you don't say something you mean, but you're saying it with your mouth, the other person it's not their fault for trusting it too, right? Because naturally that is socially acceptable as, sorry, it's conceived socially acceptable to trust those words. So yeah, I think like it's a lot of like unpacking of that, and it's definitely new. I think it is going to take some time, and I don't blame people around me not understanding things right away. Um, because again, it's like repeated awareness, repeated discussions about it. Some will ask me themselves because they're more comfortable with it. Some won't ask me because I'm not sure if it's because they're uncomfortable about it, or maybe I don't know what it is, like the concept of it, and like maybe they are like they have this internalized ableism too that they don't realize, and they're not sure where it stems from. Because even for myself, I would say things like, no, I don't want to ask, I don't want to seem lazy, or like, or I don't want them to think I'm making an excuse or I'm faking it. Because even this interview, for example, one of my biggest fears coming out with this was coming out and talking about this was that, as if people say like, oh, pity me, like, or like she seems fine, she doesn't look autistic, or um, like comments like that. And I uh, had to like mentally brace myself for that. Um, that that's something like, especially within our South Asian community, it's even worse because, again, disabilities like this are not talked about. There's a lot of autistic kids that we've seen when we were younger. We've probably heard our parents say like, "Oh, their kid has this," and like it's sad, and they pity them, which is also uh, sad to say when they like pity them like that, or it's like, "Oh, the parents go through such a hard time," but they never talk about the kids themselves. And I've noticed that a lot is that they never talk about the person themselves. They'll talk about it in relation to themselves, um, which is, I think, something that people have not realized. It's like it's just as hard for the person, and the person understands what you're saying. They might not be verbal, they might not look like they understand, but they're definitely listening to you, and they can hear you, and it's like talking about someone in a hospital when they're right there, and like judging them. Like when Ariane said, like the doctor made that comment about the drugs, um, she's right there. And I think there's like a lot of people that do that, and it's very like dehumanizing because you're right in the room, you're right in front of them, and you talk about them like this. And I think that also comes from that ableism point of view where they think that they're less than someone, um, or just like you are in a higher position where you can talk for someone like that, and you're taking their voice away, and their agency away to advocate for themselves. Um, and I think that's like part of disability justice that I hope to see is that it does empower us more in autistic voices or neurodivergent voices, and even for mental health, like those going through depression, those diagnosed with a bipolar disorder, that they have the chance to be vocal about it and speak for themselves without being dismissed of it and not being limited to a box. And that's up to them to decide what their limits are, right? I can do this. I know I can do this. I just need these accommodations. And if it's not costing you anything and inconveniencing you, I don't understand why it's a problem to accommodate that, right? Like I've seen comments from individuals or like I think institutions telling people that like, no, we can't give you a quiet room, even though we have so many free quiet rooms where you can use them, because then it'll seem like you're less competent. But they're not saying they're less competent. They just need a room to work properly in, you know, and summarize their thoughts and then come back and they'll do their job. It's, I think that's just like a huge, like, there's so many like misconceptions about it. It's crazy how these are supposed to be the experts, you know? And I think that's where I started realizing that the lived experiences of people are more important as well. Yes, there are medical knowledge. There is like, um, uh, professionals to help you. But I think it's also important to understand that these people are allowed to advocate for themselves, and you should believe them as well, right? And I think you can do that with providing the resources at least to get there. Even if someone is first, let's say, lying, right? Which is, I feel, very unlikely. Like I think it's also um, weird to dismiss like the 1% to like for people who actually need help. You can figure that out through these assessments. You can do that like as a professional, but dismissing them just like that is not the right thing to do, I find. And I just I hope that that really changes. Like it, I'm sorry, I think I went a little over again.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
I tend to do this when I'm passionate about it, but it's very. I do hope that this concept of ableism is more normalized, and like I've actually heard jokes like even within my own friends, it's like, what is this new word you're coming up with? And I'm just like, it's not a new word, guys. Like this exists. Like, and like it does sound offensive when they say it, but it's just because it's true for a lot of people. This is not common knowledge. It is something we need to bring awareness to. That's what I'm trying to say more. It's not that they're being offensive. It's just, yeah, like we don't talk about this at all, right? And it's crazy because it's everywhere. Whether you're on the bus, whether you go to a restaurant, whether you're going to a doctor's appointment, ableism can be like brought upon you anywhere, right?
It's super relevant because just even you'll see in relevance to my another episode. I had a patient with osteogenic imperfecta who's in a wheelchair, and she was talking about all the limitations. So it really goes hand in hand in like multiple spheres.
Oh, exactly.
So it's really fascinating. And honestly, I'm going to be transparent. I don't know much about it, so I was super excited to have this sit down and like really get an insight on it. So thank you for that. And honestly, thank you so much for like you tackled all of the most important things that I kind of wanted to get out there, and hearing it from someone who has lived experiences, I think is just so much more empowering for you, I hope, and just
Yeah,
more insightful, because you give a perspective that, again, we're not going to get anywhere else. We're not going to get this in our medical school classes. And I think this is
exactly.
more
Yeah,
powerful. And I genuinely hope conversations like this will promote more conversations about neurodivergence, because it is there, and
yeah,
we've spent so long ignoring that it is present, or actually, I don't know if ignoring, but just being ignorant to it. So now
yeah,
I hope there's just more conversations, and I do know for a fact more people are going to be talking about it, whether in a negative or positive sphere. They're talking about it, and hopefully it gears toward a positive sphere, just in its entirety, because it's
yeah,
something that should
exactly.
be normalized. But
Yeah.
I guess we take it one step at a time.
No, exactly. And like I said, I've already, even if it has been like over 50 years since like it took the DSM to even change, the changes are happening. And I think that's what gives me hope. And um, what helped for me, especially being autistic, and I don't know if the others that watching this are like, well, maybe I think I am, and they have doubts. There is a whole community of autistic individuals on Instagram, on Twitter, part of the actually autistic community, the hashtag actually autistic. And you'll find so many great advocates and actually autistic professionals too. So basically professionals who are autistic themselves, that work in those therapeutic fields, or are trying to bring awareness, or advocates, that'll share resources and terms on to help identify how you're feeling. Um, there's a whole range of stuff that I didn't even touch on, because that's how like in depth it is. Um, but if people want to find out more about it, they can definitely like find out through these circles as well. And it's very accessible, at least, and easy to understand, since it's from someone that's like laying it to you in like layman language, right?
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'm definitely seeing like a conversation being started. And actually, what I forgot to mention is like, even on my Instagram, I tend to like advocate just for a lot of issues, but whenever I see something that's like, whoa, like people don't know about this, let me share it. I've been doing that a lot more with ADHD and autism, and I've actually gotten comments from people who didn't know they were autistic or had ADHD themselves, and when they were seeing it, they were asking me questions. Or I had teachers who were in the field, like teaching right in elementary, and they're like, I have so many questions because this is not how we're taught when we're trained for this, right? And it opened like their mind so much, and like realizing how many gaps there are in these fields, and for the professionals, and then for people who are finding out they're autistic. I was like, I'm actually, I think it like, I actually cried at one point when someone said that they were going to get like assessed, and they were like, I didn't realize, and I'm getting my assessment like in a few days. So this is actually super helpful for me, and like it does help bringing awareness to it, even if it changes someone's life, like one person, right? um so it might not like seem like much to people, but having these conversations do help. And awareness does help in any form. So yeah.
Awesome. Um, I think pretty much that's like the perfect way to end, unless you have any parting thoughts. But thank you so much
No,
for this. This was
thank you so
powerful.
much.
And I think, I genuinely think there are going to be more than just one person who's going to have their life changed because
Oh,
of everything you had
thank
to
you
share.
for helping me advocate for this, and talk about this here, and give me a platform too. And honestly, I think I've told you so many times, but I love what you're doing with this web talk show and podcast. It like, I hope you keep doing it, and it's super important to provide visibility in real people, and feeling seen. So thank you again for doing this.
Thank you for your kind words. And you must have heard my dog yawn. And I don't think I'm going to be able to edit that out, but I'll keep it there.
Yeah,
Thank you again.
yeah. Thanks.